If you've ever visited Yellowstone National Park, I mean really visited, not just the old, faithful viewing area and the gift shop, leave a comment and tell me how far you hiked from the main roads. Because there's a reason the Park Service keeps visitors on designated trails. There's a reason the backcountry permits are so hard to get. And it's not just about protecting the wildlife or preventing forest fires. Hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to tell you will change how you think about America's first national park. My name is Samuel Ironcloud, and I'm a tribal police officer with the Crow Nation in Montana. Our reservation borders Yellowstone National Park to the north and east, covering over 2 million acres of land that my people have called home for centuries. Long before the Park Service existed. Long before the government decided this land belonged to everyone. Long before anyone thought to put a fence around the geysers and charge admission. My ancestors hunted in these mountains when the buffalo still blackened the plains. They knew every valley, every river, every hot spring that bubbled up from the earth. And they knew something else too. Something that the park rangers have never understood, something that the millions of tourists who visit Yellowstone every year will never see. They knew what lives in the spaces between. Before I tell you what happened last autumn, you need to understand what it means to be a tribal police officer on the Crow Reservation. We're responsible for law enforcement across 2.3 million acres of territory. Roughly the size of Delaware and Rhode Island combined. We have maybe 40 officers to cover all of it. That's one officer for every 57,000 acres. When something happens in the backcountry, backup isn't 20 minutes away. Backup might be 2 hours away, assuming anyone's even available. And our territory doesn't just include the reservation. We have mutual aid agreements with the Park Service, with the Gallatin County Sheriff, with Montana Fish and Wildlife. When something goes wrong near the border between our land and Yellowstone, we're often the first responders. Not because we have jurisdiction, but because we're closer. Because we know the land. Because we can get there faster than anyone else. That's the official reason anyway. The unofficial reason is that some calls the park rangers don't want to answer. Some places they've learned to avoid, and some things they've learned not to ask questions about. Over the years, an unspoken arrangement has developed between our department and the Park Service. They handle the tourists, the traffic, the bear jams on the main roads. We handle everything else, the calls that come from the edges of the map, the reports that don't make sense, the disappearances that can't be explained. I grew up in Lodge Grass, a small town on the reservation about 90 miles from the northern entrance to Yellowstone. Population maybe 2,000 if you count the dogs. My father was a rancher who spent more time drunk than sober, and my mother left when I was 6, headed to California, we heard, though she never wrote or called. My grandfather, Thomas Ironcloud, was the one who really raised me. He was a medicine man, one of the last who still practiced the old ways, who still knew the ceremonies that had been passed down for generations. When I was 12 years old, he took me camping near the Lamar Valley, just outside the park boundary. We sat around a small fire, watching the sun set over the Absaroka Mountains, and he told me the truth about Yellowstone. The white men think this place is special because of the geysers, he said, his weathered face flickering in the firelight. They think the hot water comes from underground rivers, from magma, from geological formations they can measure with their instruments and explain in their textbooks. Doesn't it? I asked. He smiled, the kind of smile that held secrets older than the mountains themselves. The water comes from below. That much is true. But the heat? The pressure that pushes it up through the rock, that makes Old Faithful erupt every 90 minutes like clockwork? He pointed toward the mountains, toward the wilderness that stretched beyond the park boundaries into territories that no tourist would ever see. That comes from the old ones, from the things that lived here before the mountains were mountains, before the rivers cut their valleys, before anything walked on two legs or drew breath from the air. What are they? I asked, my 12-year-old mind caught between fascination and fear. We call them Baxpe y Chile, the beneath dwellers. They've lived in the deep places since before time had meaning. The heat you feel when the geysers erupt, that's their breath, rising from the depths. The earthquakes that shake the park every year, that's them moving, shifting, dreaming in their ancient sleep. Yellowstone isn't a geological wonder, grandson. It's a warning sign, a reminder that we share this land with things far older and far more powerful than ourselves. I didn't believe him then. I was a kid caught between two worlds, the modern world of television and school and video games, and the traditional world of ceremonies and stories and things that couldn't be explained by science. I chose the modern world. I wanted to be normal, to fit in, to leave the old superstitions behind. After high school, I joined the Marines. Did 2 tours in Afghanistan, saw things that changed me in ways I still don't fully understand. Came back with a Purple Heart, a medical discharge, and a head full of nightmares that made sleep feel like enemy territory. I thought law enforcement would be straightforward after that. Criminals and victims, evidence and procedure, problems that could be solved with handcuffs and paperwork. When I joined the Crow Tribal Police 5 years ago, Chief Bernard Running Horse gave me the official orientation. Policies and procedures, radio codes, use of force protocols, all the standard stuff you'd expect. But on my 3rd day, after the official training was complete, he called me back into his office. He closed the door, pulled down the blinds, and sat across from me with an expression I couldn't read. Then he handed me a piece of paper. It was old, yellowed with age, the edges worn soft from being handled many times. The typing was faded but still legible, 7 rules laid out in a numbered list. "This isn't in any manual," Chief Running Horse said. "This doesn't come from the BIA or the state of Montana or the Department of Justice. This comes from officers who've worked this land for generations, who learned the hard way what happens when you ignore the warnings." I read the rules. Rule 1. Never respond to calls from the prior mountains after sunset. If dispatch insists, radio back that you're experiencing mechanical difficulties and wait until dawn. Rule 2. If you find a campsite that's been abandoned with food still cooking and belongings still present, do not search for the occupants. Mark the GPS coordinates, leave immediately, and file the report as inconclusive, no contact made. Rule 3. During the autumn months, avoid the area known as Dead Horse Creek. This is not negotiable. If a call comes from that location, contact Chief Running Horse directly before responding. Rule 4. If you encounter a person walking alone in the backcountry who doesn't cast a shadow, do not approach them. Do not speak to them. Do not acknowledge their presence in any way. Return to your vehicle immediately. Rule 5. The caves near Hell-Roaring Mountain are sacred sites and off-limits to all personnel. If a suspect enters one of these caves, they are no longer your responsibility. Under no circumstances should you pursue them underground. Rule 6. If you hear drumming in the wilderness where no ceremony is taking place, you are not hearing drumming. You are experiencing altitude-related auditory hallucinations. Return to a lower elevation immediately and do not investigate the sound. Rule 7. When the bison herds move without reason, when they flee from areas where no predators exist, do not investigate. Clear any civilians from the area and establish a perimeter at least 2 miles from the herd's last position. I looked up from the paper. Chief Running Horse was watching me with patient eyes, waiting for my reaction. "Is this a hazing thing?" I asked. "Some kind of initiation ritual for new officers?" "Does it look like I'm joking, Samuel?" Half of these don't make any sense. Shadows, underground caves, bison running from nothing. They don't make sense because you're still thinking like a white man. You're thinking like the Marines trained you. Everything logical, everything tactical, every problem with a rational solution. Chief Running Horse leaned forward, his desk chair creaking under his weight. But this isn't Afghanistan. This isn't some foreign territory where you're the outsider trying to understand local customs. This is your homeland, Crowland. The rules here are older than logic, older than tactics, older than anything they taught you in boot camp. With respect, Chief, I don't believe in I don't care what you believe. I care about keeping my officers alive. He took the paper from my hands, folded it carefully along its worn creases, and handed it back to me. Your grandfather was Thomas Ironcloud. I knew him. Everyone on this reservation knew him. He was a good man, a powerful medicine man, one of the last real ones. He would have wanted you to take these rules seriously. My grandfather told me stories when I was a kid. Campfire tales. I grew out of them. Did you? Chief Running Horse stood, walked to his window, looked out at the mountains that dominated the horizon. Thomas came to see me, you know, about a month before he passed. Sat right where you're sitting now. He told me you'd come home eventually, that you'd end up in this office wearing that badge. He said to give you time. Said the mountains would teach you what he couldn't. And you believed him? I've been doing this job for 32 years, Samuel. Started when I was 23, just like you. I've lost 4 officers in that time. 2 to drunk drivers on Highway 212. 1 to a domestic violence call that went sideways. The 4th, he paused, his jaw tightening. The 4th one ignored Rule 5. Henderson Crow flies high. Good man, good officer. We found his patrol car parked outside one of the hell-roaring caves with the engine still running and the driver's door open. His tracks led into the cave entrance. They didn't come back out. What happened to him? The beneath dwellers took him, or something else did. Either way, he's gone. Body was never recovered. Family never got closure. Chief Running Horse turned back to face me. You don't have to believe me. You don't have to believe any of this, but follow the rules. That's all I ask. Follow them, and you'll survive your posting here. Ignore them, and I'll be the one writing a letter to your family, trying to explain how you died in a way that makes sense to people who weren't there. I followed the rules for 4 years without understanding why. Avoided the prior mountains after dark. Filed reports that said inconclusive when the truth was something I couldn't explain. Ignored the drumming I sometimes heard in the deep wilderness, even when it was so loud it made my teeth vibrate in my skull. Then came the autumn when everything changed. It started in late September, when the aspens were turning gold and the elk were bugling their mating calls across the valleys. I was on routine patrol near the park boundary, checking on some backcountry campsites that had been reported abandoned by a hiking group passing through. This happened more often than tourists knew. People would hike into the wilderness, set up camp, and then just vanish. Leave all their gear behind. Never check back into the ranger station. Never show up at their cars. Never come home. The Park Service classified most of these as missing persons cases. The files would stay open for a year, maybe 2, before going cold. No evidence of foul play. No signs of animal attack. Just people who walked into the mountains and never walked out. I found the campsite about 5 miles from the nearest fire road, in a small clearing surrounded by lodgepole pines. 2 high-end tents, both zipped shut. A cooking setup with a camp stove and a pot of water that had boiled completely dry over a dead propane flame. Backpacks leaning against a fallen log. Sleeping bags visible through the mesh windows of the tents. Hiking boots lined up neatly by the tent doors. Everything you'd expect from a couple on a week-long backcountry trip. Everything except the couple themselves. I approached the site carefully, my hand resting on my service weapon out of habit. The silence was the first thing I noticed. Absolute oppressive silence. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering in the branches, no insects buzzing in the late afternoon warmth. Just the whisper of wind through the pines, and my own breathing, too loud in my ears. I checked the first tent. Unzipped the door, peered inside. 2 sleeping bags. Unzipped and pushed aside as if the occupants had gotten up in the middle of the night. A paperback novel lay open on one of the sleeping pads, spine cracked at the halfway point. A headlamp sat beside it, batteries still good when I clicked it on. Everything normal, everything ordinary, everything suggesting that whoever had been here expected to come back. The second tent was the same. Sleeping bags, personal items, a journal with entries that ended mid-sentence. The last line read, "Heard something strange outside the tent last night. David thinks it was just what?" The sentence didn't finish. The pen had trailed off the edge of the page, leaving a thin line of ink that curved downward as if the writer's hand had been pulled away. I checked the food cache they'd hung from a tree branch. Proper bear protocol, everything by the book. The bags were untouched. No claw marks, no torn fabric, no scattered granola bars. Whatever had made these people leave their campsite, it wasn't a hungry grizzly. Then I found the camera. It was sitting on a log near the fire pit, partially hidden by a fleece jacket that had been draped over it. A nice digital SLR with a telephoto lens. Expensive equipment, the kind serious photographers carried. I turned it on and started scrolling through the images. Happy couple on the trailhead, mugging for the camera with their backpacks on. Sunset over the Absaroka Mountains, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. A bull elk grazing in a meadow, its antlers silhouetted against the golden grass. A selfie inside one of the tents, both of them smiling, looking tired but happy. Normal vacation photos. The kind you'd post on social media with hashtags about adventure and wilderness and living your best life. Then I reached the last image, and everything changed. It had been taken at night. The flash illuminated maybe 20 feet of darkness beyond the campfire's glow. In the foreground, the woman was sitting on a log, smiling at the camera. She was holding a metal mug, coffee or hot chocolate probably, and her face was relaxed, happy, completely unaware. Behind her, at the very edge of the flash's reach, something was standing between the trees. It was tall, 7 feet at least, maybe 8. The proportions were wrong in a way that made my brain itch. Arms too long, hanging past where the knees should be. Legs bent at angles that defied human anatomy, like a person's skeleton had been broken and reassembled by someone who'd only had a vague description of how bodies worked. The torso was thin, emaciated almost, but somehow conveyed an impression of terrible strength. And the face, if you could call it a face, was a flat, featureless surface. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, just smooth gray skin that seemed to absorb the camera's flash rather than reflect it. Like looking at a hole in the photograph, a void where a face should be. The woman in the foreground was smiling. She had no idea it was there. No idea something was standing in the darkness just beyond the fire's reach, close enough to touch her if it wanted to. I stared at that image for a long time, too long. The sun was sinking toward the western peaks, shadows stretching across the clearing like reaching fingers. The temperature was dropping fast, the way it does in the mountains when daylight fades. Then I heard the drums. No, not drums. Something else. Footsteps. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps, like something massive walking through the forest with no concern for the noise it made. coming from the north, coming from deeper in the wilderness, coming from the direction of Dead Horse Creek. Rule 3. During the autumn months, avoid Dead Horse Creek at all costs. Rule 6. If you hear drumming, return to a lower elevation immediately. The footsteps were getting closer, shaking the ground with each impact, making the water in the abandoned cookpot ripple. I grabbed the camera and ran. I crashed through the forest in the fading light, branches whipping my face, roots grabbing at my ankles. I didn't look back. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, to put distance between myself and whatever was making those sounds. 2 hours later, gasping and stumbling, I reached my patrol truck. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, started the engine with shaking hands. Sat there in the driver's seat with my weapon drawn, watching the tree line, waiting for something to emerge from the darkness. Nothing did. But when I finally calmed down enough to check the camera again, the last photograph was gone. Not deleted. The file was still there, still showed a timestamp, still took up space on the memory card. But when I opened it, there was nothing but static. Gray noise, like a television with no signal. The couple was found 3 weeks later by a search and rescue team. What was left of them anyway. The official report said grisly attack. Case closed. I didn't argue, but I knew the truth now. My grandfather had been right all along. The beneath dwellers were real, and they were waking up. The weeks following the campsite discovery were the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep without seeing that photograph, the woman smiling, unaware, while something stood behind her in the darkness. I couldn't close my eyes without hearing those footsteps, feeling the ground shake beneath my feet as something massive moved through the forest. I started researching, spent my off days in the tribal archives, digging through records that hadn't been touched in decades. Spent my evenings at the library in Hardin, scrolling through microfilm of old newspapers, looking for patterns. Spent my nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen wasn't real. The evidence said otherwise. The disappearances went back over 100 years. Hunters who walked into the mountains and never returned, their camps found intact, their horses still tied to trees, their rifles still loaded and ready. Prospectors during the 1870s gold rush who vanished from their claims, leaving behind tools and supplies and half-eaten meals. Entire families of homesteaders who abandoned their cabins with fires still burning in the hearths, dishes still on the tables, children's toys still scattered across the floors. The pattern was always the same. People went into certain areas that my people had avoided for generations, and they didn't come back. No bodies, no explanations, just absence where presence should have been. The official explanations varied by era. Indian attacks before the reservations were established. Wild animal predation once the tribes were confined. Exposure and hypothermia in the modern age of scientific rationalism. But the Crow elders had their own explanations, passed down in stories that weren't written in any book. They got too close to the places where the beneath dwellers lived. They camped near the wrong creek, explored the wrong cave, hiked too deep into territory that wasn't meant for human feet. And in autumn, when the boundary between worlds grew thin, the beneath dwellers came up to feed. I found a handwritten account from 1952. A rancher named Harold Whitehawk, who'd lost 17 cattle in a single night near Dead Horse Creek. He described finding them the next morning, arranged in a perfect circle in a meadow where no predator could have hurted them. No blood, no wounds, just dead animals with expressions of absolute terror frozen on their faces, as if they'd seen something that stopped their hearts mid-beat. I was reading this account in my apartment when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Chief Running Horse's personal number, not the station, not dispatch, his private cell. "Samuel, my office, now." His voice was tight, controlled, the way it got when something bad had happened and he was trying not to let it show. I drove to the station through empty streets, the reservation quiet in the way it always got after midnight. The mountains loomed against the starlit sky, darker shapes against the darkness, watching over the land like they'd watched for millennia. Chief Running Horse was waiting in his office with the blinds drawn and the door locked. He looked older than I'd seen him in years, the lines on his face deeper, the gray in his hair more pronounced, his eyes carrying a weight that went beyond simple exhaustion. "Close the door," he said. "Lock it behind you." I did. "You've been asking questions," he said. "Digging through the archives, talking to elders about things that aren't supposed to be discussed outside of ceremonies." "Chief, I'm not angry." He held up a hand to stop my explanation. "I'm worried. When officers start digging into the old stories, it usually means something's happened. Something they can't explain, something they can't forget." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down. Tell me about the campsite." So I told him everything. The abandoned tents, the half-finished journal entry, the camera with its impossible photograph, the thing I'd seen standing in the darkness behind the smiling woman, the footsteps I'd heard coming from Dead Horse Creek, the way the image had corrupted itself, erasing its own evidence as if whatever I'd captured didn't want to be seen. When I finished, Chief Running Horse was quiet for a long time. He opened his desk drawer, pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, poured us each a measure. The good stuff, not the rot gut you'd find at the bar in Crow Agency, but actual aged bourbon that probably cost more than I made in a day. "You saw one of them," he finally said. "Not in person, but you saw evidence. That photograph captured something that shouldn't be captured." He drank half his whiskey in one swallow. "That's more than most officers ever see. More than I wanted you to see this soon." "What are they, Chief? Really? Not the stories, not the legends. What are they actually?" "I told you before. Baxpe I Chile. The Beneath Dwellers. That's a name. It's not an explanation." He sighed, finished his whiskey, poured another. "You want the truth? The full truth, not the sanitized version I give to new officers?" He waited for me to nod. "Fine. But understand, once you know this, you can't unknow it. It'll change how you see everything. The land, the park, your job, your place in the world. There's no going back. I'm already past going back. I saw that photograph. I heard those footsteps. I need to understand." Chief Running Horse leaned back in his chair and began to speak. "The elders say the Beneath Dwellers have been here since before the beginning. Not before the crow, before everything. Before humans existed in any form. Before the animals, before the plants, before the mountains themselves. They were here when this land was nothing but fire and molten rock, when the first crust was cooling over the magma beneath. They didn't evolve. They didn't develop. They simply were and are, and always will be. That's impossible. Nothing could survive those conditions. Nothing we understand could survive. The Beneath Dwellers aren't something we understand. They're not animals in any biological sense. They're not spirits in any religious sense. They're something else entirely. Something that exists outside the categories we use to make sense of reality." He drank more whiskey. "The heat beneath Yellowstone, the geothermal activity, the magma chamber, the volcanic potential, that's them. That's their home. They live in the fire, in the pressure, in the spaces between tectonic plates. The geysers aren't just hot water from underground. They're exhaust vents. They're the Beneath Dwellers breathing. Why do they come to the surface? Different elders have different theories. Some say they're curious about the world above. fascinated by the cold, the air, the strange creatures that crawl across the skin of the earth. Others say they're hungry, that they feed on something humans possess that they lack. Fear, maybe. Consciousness. Souls, if you believe in that kind of thing. What do you believe? Chief Running Horse was quiet for a moment, staring into his glass. I believe they're territorial. Like any predator, they have their domain, and they defend it. For thousands of years, maybe millions, they've stayed in their territory and we've stayed in ours. The surface belongs to us, the depths belong to them. But there are boundary zones, places where the two worlds overlap, places where the barrier between above and below gets thin. Like Dead Horse Creek, like the hell-roaring caves, like a dozen other sites scattered across the reservation and the park. His eyes met mine. Autumn is when the barriers are weakest. The earth cools, the pressure from below increases, and the beneath dwellers rise closer to the surface. That's when they're most active. That's when they hunt. Hunt for what? For anyone foolish enough to wander into their territory. Anyone who doesn't know the rules. Anyone who ignores the warnings. He set down his glass. The Park Service doesn't understand this. Not really. They have their own rules about staying on trails and getting backcountry permits, but they think it's about conservation, about protecting ecosystems. They don't understand what they're really protecting people from. Why haven't we told them? We've tried. Decades ago, long before my time as chief, tribal leaders approached the Park Service with warnings, tried to explain why certain areas needed to be permanently closed. You know what happened? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. They called us superstitious savages, said we were trying to sabotage the park with primitive folklore. Then they sent a team of rangers to investigate one of the restricted caves, a system near Hell-Roaring Mountain that had been off-limits since before my grandfather was born. What happened? 7 rangers went into that cave. 1 came out. Chief Running Horse's voice went flat. His name was Robert Hendricks, 26 years old, 3 years with the Park Service, engaged to be married. When the rescue team found him at the cave entrance, he was completely catatonic. Wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, wouldn't respond to any stimulus. Just sat there staring at nothing, making a sound in his throat like a wounded animal. He died 3 weeks later in a hospital in Bozeman. Never said a single word about what happened underground. His hair had turned completely white. Jesus Christ. After that, the Park Service stopped asking questions. They classified the incident, sealed the records, and implemented new protocols for backcountry areas that lined up, coincidentally of course, with the zones we'd been warning them about. They don't want to know the truth. It's easier for them to blame grizzlies and hypothermia and death by misadventure than to accept that something lives under their park that they can't control, can't study, and can't kill. I thought about the photograph, the thing standing in the darkness, the way its featureless face seemed to absorb the camera's flash like a black hole absorbing light. Chief, I understand the history, I understand the danger, but there's something else going on, isn't there? Something that's changed. He looked at me sharply. What makes you say that? The campsite I found. It was 5 miles from the nearest restricted zone. The Thorntons weren't anywhere near Dead Horse Creek or the Hell-Roaring Caves. They were in an area that should have been safe. I leaned forward. If the beneath dwellers have always stayed in their territory, if the boundaries have always held, why are people disappearing from places where this has never happened before? Chief Running Horse was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more careful. You're right. Something has changed. Over the past few years, maybe the past decade, there have been incidents further and further from the traditional restricted zones. Campsites abandoned in areas that should have been safe. Hikers disappearing from trails that have been used without incident for generations. The boundaries are shifting, expanding. They're taking more territory. Maybe. Or maybe something is pushing them out of their old territory, forcing them closer to the surface. Or maybe they're just getting bolder, getting hungrier. He met my eyes. The truth is, Samuel, I don't know what's happening. The elders don't know. Nobody knows. All we know is that the patterns are changing, and we're not prepared for what that might mean. What do? We do what we've always done. Follow the rules. Keep people away from the restricted areas. File reports that don't mention what we actually see. He paused. But there's something else now. Something that requires a more direct response. He pulled a file folder from his desk drawer and handed it to me. Inside was a Park Service incident report, along with photographs and personnel records. 2 days ago, a ranger named Jessica Whitmore went missing during a routine patrol near Dead Horse Creek. Her partner found her vehicle abandoned on a fire road about a mile from the creek. Engine running, driver's door open, coffee still warm in the cup holder. No sign of her, no tracks, no explanation. I looked at the photograph attached to the file. Jessica Whitmore was 31 years old, with short brown hair and a confident smile. Her personnel record showed 8 years with the Park Service, multiple commendations, advanced wilderness training. She knew what she was doing, I said. Exactly. She wasn't some inexperienced hiker who wandered off the trail. She was a professional. She knew these mountains as well as any outsider could. Chief Running Horse took the file back. The Park Service has asked for our assistance in the search. They want someone who knows the terrain, who can cover ground faster than their people. You're sending me. I'm asking you. There's a difference. He stood, walked to his window, looked out at the darkness. Your grandfather was Thomas Iron Cloud. He had gifts that most people don't even believe exist. The ability to sense the old ones, to feel when they're near, to see things that hide from normal perception. I think you have the same gifts. I think that's why the photograph corrupted itself when you looked at it. The beneath dwellers don't want to be seen, but somehow you saw one anyway. That doesn't make me qualified to go looking for more of them. No, but it makes you our best chance at understanding what's happening. He turned to face me. The ranger who went missing. Her partner's name is Daniel Reeves. 15 years with the Park Service. Solid reputation. Knows these mountains inside and out. He's not handling this well. I wouldn't either if my partner vanished into thin air. No, neither would I. Chief Running Horse handed me a set of GPS coordinates. He's waiting at the Dead Horse Creek trailhead. He'll brief you on what he saw, what he heard, where he last had contact with Whitmore. After that, it's your call how to proceed. And if I find something, if I find her, or find what took her, then you do whatever you have to do to get back alive. And you tell me everything. He put his hand on my shoulder. Be careful, Samuel. Find out what you can, but don't take unnecessary risks. If you sense something wrong, if your gut tells you to run, you run. No hesitation. No looking back. Understood? Understood. I was at the door when he called my name one more time. Samuel, there's one more thing. He opened another drawer, pulled out a leather pouch about the size of my fist. Your grandfather left this for you. Gave it to me before he died, told me to hold on to it until you were ready. I took the pouch. It was heavier than it looked, and warm, not from sitting in a drawer, but warm like it had its own internal heat source, like something inside it was alive. What is it? I don't know. He wouldn't tell me. just said you'd know when to open it. Chief Running Horse's expression was unreadable. I think the time has come. I drove to Dead Horse Creek as dawn was breaking over the mountains, the leather pouch sitting on my passenger seat, its strange warmth radiating through the leather. I didn't open it. Whatever was inside, whatever my grandfather had left me, I wasn't ready to face it yet. But I had a feeling I would be soon. The Dead Horse Creek trailhead was a small gravel pullout about 15 miles from the nearest paved road, accessible only by a winding fire road that tested the limits of my truck's suspension. By the time I arrived, the sun had crested the eastern peaks, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Daniel Reeves was waiting for me beside a Park Service vehicle, his ranger uniform rumpled as if he'd slept in it, or more likely hadn't slept at all. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent most of his life outdoors. But his eyes were wrong, hollow, haunted. The eyes of a man who'd seen something that didn't fit into his understanding of the world and was still trying to convince himself it hadn't happened. Officer Ironcloud? His voice was hoarse, scratchy, like he'd been screaming or crying or both. Ranger Reeves, I'm sorry about your partner. He nodded, a jerky movement that didn't quite work. His hands were shaking, a fine tremor that he tried to hide by shoving them into his jacket pockets. They told me Crow Tribal was sending someone who knows this area, someone who might be able to help. I'll do everything I can. She was right here. He pointed to a spot about 20 feet from where we stood, where the gravel gave way to hard-packed dirt. Her truck was parked right here, engine still running, driver's door wide open, coffee still warm in the cup holder, like she'd just stepped out for a second and was going to step right back in. Did you see anything unusual before she disappeared? Hear anything? Reeves hesitated, his yes worked silently for a moment, as if he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. His hands were shaking harder now, visible tremors that he couldn't hide anymore. Ranger Reeves? I heard drums. The words came out in a rush, like he'd been holding them back and couldn't anymore. Coming from up the creek, deep, slow drums, like a heartbeat, but slower than a heartbeat. Slower than anything alive should be. He looked at me with something desperate in his eyes. I hiked 2 miles up that creek looking for the source. There was nobody there, no ceremony, no campers with speakers, nothing. Just empty forest and those goddamn drums getting louder the further I went. I thought about Rule 6, about altitude-related auditory hallucinations, about all the comfortable lies we told ourselves to avoid facing the truth. What happened then? I got scared, not embarrassed to admit it. I got scared in a way I haven't been scared since I was a kid afraid of the dark. Something about those drums. He shook his head. I turned around and headed back to the trucks. That's when I found Jess's vehicle. Door open, engine running, no sign of her anywhere. How long were you gone when you hiked up the creek? 45 minutes, maybe an hour. She was supposed to wait here, run the radio check at 0900 while I investigated the sound. His voice cracked. I shouldn't have left her alone. Whatever happened, it happened because I left her alone. You couldn't have known. Couldn't I? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. 15 years I've worked these mountains. 15 years of strange things happening that nobody wants to talk about. Hikers who vanish without a trace. Campsites that look like people just evaporated mid-meal. Animals that won't go near certain areas no matter how good the grazing is. He met my eyes. I've always told myself there were rational explanations. Weather, wildlife, human error. But I've always known, somewhere deep down, that something else was going on. Something I didn't want to look at too closely. And now, Now, my partner's gone, and I heard drums that weren't there, and I don't know what to believe anymore. He pulled his hands out of his pockets, looked at them as if seeing them for the first time. The trembling had gotten worse. "What the hell is going on out here, officer? What happened to Jessica?" I could have lied to him, could have given him the comfortable explanations. Got lost, had an accident, will probably turn up any minute. But looking at his face, seeing the fear and confusion and desperate need for truth, I couldn't do it. "I don't know exactly what happened," I said, "but I'm going to find out." I started up the trail toward the Dead Horse Creek, leaving Daniel Reeves standing by the empty vehicles. He didn't follow, didn't offer to come with me. Just stood there watching me go, his hands still shaking, the echo of impossible drums still ringing in his ears. The leather pouch on my belt grew warmer with every step. The trail wound through dense stands of lodgepole pine, climbing steadily toward the ridgeline that marked the boundary between the reservation and the national park. I'd hiked this area a dozen times during my years with the tribal police, but today it felt different. The forest was too quiet. No birds calling warnings from the treetops. No squirrels chattering territorial challenges. No insects buzzing in the patches of sunlight that filtered through the canopy. Just the crunch of my boots on pine needles and the whisper of wind through branches that seemed to lean toward me as I passed. And underneath it all, growing louder with every step, the distant pulse of drums. Rule 6: if you hear drumming in the wilderness where no ceremony is taking place, you are experiencing altitude-related auditory hallucinations. But I wasn't at altitude. I was barely at 6,000 feet, well within normal ranges. The drumming wasn't a hallucination, it was real as the ground beneath my feet, as real as the warmth radiating from the pouch on my belt. I found Jessica Whitmore's last known position about 2 miles up the trail. It was marked with orange tape tied around a tree, standard search and rescue protocol. The ground around it had been trampled by the initial search team, their boot prints overlapping in a chaotic pattern that obscured any useful tracks. But I wasn't looking for tracks, I was looking for something else. I closed my eyes and tried to do what my grandfather had taught me years ago, before I'd rejected his teachings and run away to the Marines. Tried to quiet my mind, to open my senses, to feel the land the way he'd always said our people could feel it. For a long time, nothing happened. Just the wind on my face, and the drums in my ears, and the warmth of the pouch against my hip. Then it hit me. Not a sound, not a sight. A feeling deep in my gut, primal, the kind of fear that bypasses conscious thought and speaks directly to the animal brain. The feeling of being watched, being measured, being weighed by something that looked at humans the way we looked at insects crawling across a sidewalk. I opened my eyes. The forest looked exactly the same. Trees, rocks, dead leaves, patches of sky visible through the canopy. Nothing moved. Nothing was visibly there. But I knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, beyond evidence, beyond anything the Marines had taught me about situational awareness, that I was not alone. Something was watching me. Something was waiting to see what I would do. "I know you're there," I said out loud. My voice sounded strange in the silence. Too loud, too human, too alive. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not here to trespass. I'm here to find the woman who disappeared. Jessica Whitmore. She's a park ranger. She has family, people who love her, people who are waiting for her to come home." No response. Just the wind and the drums and the feeling of invisible eyes boring into me from every direction at once. My grandfather was Thomas Ironcloud. He was a medicine man, one of the last who still practiced the old ways. He taught me to respect the boundaries between your world and mine. I touched the pouch on my belt. He left me something before he died, a gift. I think it was meant to help me understand. Still nothing, but the watching feeling intensified, as if whatever was observing me had become more interested. I made a decision. Maybe it was stupid, maybe it was suicidal, but I'd come this far and I wasn't going back without answers. I opened the pouch. Inside was a stone, smooth, black, oval, about the size of a hen's egg. It was warm to the touch, almost hot, and when I held it up to the dappled sunlight, I could see something moving inside it. Not a reflection, not an optical illusion. Something actually moving within the stone itself, swirling like smoke trapped in glass, like darkness given form and motion. The moment my fingers closed around it, the world changed. The forest was still there, but layered over it, occupying the same space but somehow separate, was another landscape. A ghost landscape, translucent and strange. In this other vision, the trees were different. Older, twisted. Their bark was black as coal, and their branches reached toward the sky like grasping fingers, like drowning men reaching for rescue that would never come. The ground in this ghost world was not soil and pine needles, but something else, a surface that pulsed with its own inner heat, that glowed with faint lines of orange and red like cracks in a furnace door. And moving between those twisted trees, flowing over that burning ground, were shapes. The beneath dwellers. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They surrounded me in the ghost landscape, invisible to normal sight but perfectly visible through the stone's lens. Tall shapes, thin shapes, shapes with two long limbs and featureless faces. They moved with a fluid grace that was almost beautiful, flowing between the ghost trees like water flowing downhill, like shadows fleeing from light. They weren't threatening me, not yet. They were watching, studying, trying to understand what I was, this strange creature who could suddenly see into their world, who held a stone that bridged the gap between above and below. One of them moved closer. It was the same type of creature I'd seen in the photograph. 7 or 8 feet tall, arms hanging past its knees, face a smooth gray blank. But through the stone's vision I could see details I'd missed before. The skin wasn't simply gray. It was translucent, like frosted glass, and underneath it I could see something pulsing. Not blood, not anything biological, something that glowed with its own inner light, flowing through channels in the creature's body like magma, flowing through volcanic tubes. It stopped about 10 feet away, its blank face tilted to one side, a gesture that seemed almost curious, almost human. "Can you understand me?" I asked. No response. But I felt something, a pressure in my mind, like fingers pressing against the inside of my skull. Not painful, just present, intrusive, as if something was trying to read my thoughts, to flip through my memories like pages in a book. I let it. I don't know how else to describe what happened next. It wasn't communication in any normal sense, no words, no images, no clear exchange of information. It was more like sharing. I felt what the beneath dweller felt. Felt its age, impossibly ancient, older than the mountains, older than the continent beneath my feet. Felt its hunger, not for food, but for something else, something I couldn't quite identify. Felt its confusion about humans, these strange creatures that burned so bright and died so fast, that built things and destroyed them, that felt so intensely and forgot so quickly. And underneath all of that, woven through it like a dark thread through pale cloth, I felt something else. Fear. The beneath dweller was afraid. Not of me, not of humans, of something else, something deeper. Something that was pushing them out of their territory, forcing them toward the surface, making them hunt in places they'd never hunted before. I tried to form the question in my mind, what are you afraid of? The connection shifted. Instead of the beneath dwellers' emotions, I felt images. Fragmentary, chaotic, like trying to watch a movie through a shattered lens. I saw the depths beneath Yellowstone, not the magma chambers that geologists mapped, but something far deeper, far older, a space that seemed to extend forever, lit by the glow of molten rock and something else, something that pulsed with its own terrible light. I saw the beneath dwellers in their home moving through that space like fish through water, ancient and eternal and content. And I saw something else, something at the very bottom of that impossible space, a presence, a consciousness, a hunger so vast and so ancient that the beneath dwellers themselves were like insects before it. The first hunger. The connection broke suddenly, violently, like a rope snapping under too much strain. The beneath dweller in front of me jerked backward, its blank face turning toward the north, toward the heart of the restricted zone, toward whatever lay beneath Dead Horse Creek. Then it ran. They all ran. Every single one of the shapes I could see through the stone's vision turned and fled, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move, vanishing into the ghost landscape like shadows fleeing the sunrise. And then I heard it. Not drums. Something else. A sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, from above, from below, from inside my own skull. It was deep, deeper than sound should be able to go. It vibrated in my bones, in my teeth, in the fluid of my eyes. It was a voice, a single word, spoken in a language that predated human speech, a language that predated language itself. I didn't understand the word, but I understood the meaning. Mine. The ground shook. Not an earthquake. Something more localized, more intentional. Like something vast was moving beneath my feet, displacing tons of rock and soil as it rose toward the surface. Like something was waking up. I ran. I don't remember much of the next half hour, just fragments. Trees whipping past, roots grabbing at my feet. The thunder of my own heartbeat drowning out everything except that terrible voice still echoing in my skull. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs screamed, and I burst out of the forest onto the fire road where I'd left my truck. Daniel Reeves was gone. His Park Service vehicle was still there, but the man himself had vanished. I didn't wait to look for him. I jumped in my truck, started the engine, and drove. I didn't stop until I was 15 miles from Dead Horse Creek, until the shaking in my hands had subsided enough to hold the steering wheel steady. Then I pulled over and called Chief Running Horse. "Samuel, what happened?" "I saw them." I was babbling, I knew, but I couldn't stop. The beneath dwellers. Through my grandfather's stone, I saw them. They were all around me, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. But they're not the problem, Chief. They're running from something, something bigger, something that's pushing them out of their territory. Slow down. What do you mean, something bigger? I don't know exactly. I didn't see it directly, but I felt it. I heard it. I struggled to find words for the wordless. It spoke. One word. It said mine, like it was claiming everything. The land, the mountains, the beneath dwellers, us, everything. Silence on the other end of the line. "Chief, did you hear me?" "I heard you." His voice was heavy in a way I'd never heard before. "Samuel, where's the park ranger? Daniel Reeves?" "Gone. His truck's still at the trailhead, but he's not there, I think." I couldn't finish the sentence. "Get back to the station. Now. Don't stop for anything. Don't talk to anyone. Just drive." I drove, but all the way back to Crow Agency I could feel it. The presence I'd sensed through the stone. The first hunger, stirring in the depths, rising toward the surface for the first time in generations. And the beneath dwellers, ancient, terrible, inhuman, fleeing before it like rabbits before a wildfire. If they were afraid, what chance did we have? Chief Running Horse was waiting for me outside the station when I pulled into the parking lot. He wasn't alone. 2 other officers stood with him, Frank Spotted Elk and Mary Takes Enemy, both veterans who'd been with the tribal police longer than I'd been alive. Their faces were grim, set in the expressions of people who knew something terrible was happening and had accepted that they were the ones who'd have to deal with it. "Inside," Chief Running Horse said before I could speak. "All of you. Now." We gathered in his office. 4 of us crowded around his desk while he locked the door and pulled down the blinds. The atmosphere was heavy, charged, like the air before a thunderstorm, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room," Chief Running Horse said. "Not ever. Not to family, not to friends, not to anyone outside this department. Anyone who can't make that commitment, leave now." He paused, looking at each of us in turn. Nobody moved. "Good. Then we begin." He pulled a rolled document from behind his desk. Old leather, cracked and faded with age. When he unrolled it across the desk surface, I saw it was a map. Hand-drawn on animal hide, the lines faded, but still visible after what must have been centuries. It showed the area around Yellowstone, but not the way modern maps showed it. Instead of roads and park boundaries, it depicted something else. A network of tunnels and caves extending deep beneath the mountains, branching and connecting in patterns that looked almost organic. Like veins, like roots, like the circulatory system of something impossibly vast. At the center of the network, directly beneath where Old Faithful now stood, was a symbol I'd never seen before. A circle with something coiled inside it, something with too many limbs, too many angles, something that hurt to look at even in crude sketch form. "The first hunger," Chief Running Horse said, following my gaze. "Our ancestors mapped its body 300 years ago, when they first learned what lived beneath the mountains. This is where it sleeps, this is where it dreams, and this," he pointed to a spot on the map near Dead Horse Creek, "is where it's closest to the surface, where the barrier between its world and ours is thinnest." "That's where I heard it," I said. "That's where it spoke. And that's where we need to go." Chief Running Horse met my eyes. "Tonight, before it wakes up any further." Mary Takes Enemy stepped forward. "Chief, with respect, what exactly are we supposed to do when we get there? You're talking about something that makes the beneath dwellers look like insects. How are 4 tribal police officers supposed to stop something like that?" "We're not going to stop it. We're going to put it back to sleep." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a bundle wrapped in red cloth. When he unwrapped it, I saw objects I recognized from my grandfather's cabin. A drum made from buffalo hide, its surface painted with symbols. A bundle of sage and sweetgrass tied with sinew. A knife with a blade of black obsidian, its edge still sharp after centuries. These are ceremonial items, sacred objects passed down through generations of medicine men. They were used the last time the first hunger stirred, in 1847, during the Great Disruption. "The Great Disruption?" Frank Spotted Elk asked. "The elders don't speak of it often. It was the last time the first hunger tried to wake up. The last time it rose high enough to reach the surface. Entire villages were destroyed. Hundreds of our people died. The beneath dwellers fled their territories and attacked anyone they encountered, driven mad by fear." Chief Running Horse's voice was heavy with inherited grief. "Our ancestors managed to put it back to sleep, but the cost was terrible. A dozen of the most powerful medicine men sacrificed themselves in a ceremony at Dead Horse Creek. They gave their lives, their spirits, their essence, to push the first hunger back into the depths. "And you want us to do the same thing?" Mary asked. "Sacrifice ourselves?" "No. The situation isn't that desperate yet. The first hunger is stirring, but it hasn't fully awakened. If we can perform the ceremony now, before it reaches full consciousness, we might be able to send it back to sleep without anyone dying." He looked at me. "Samuel, your grandfather's stone, it allowed you to see the beneath dwellers, to communicate with them in a way. It might also allow you to see the first hunger, to understand what we're dealing with. You want me to use it again. I want you to guide us, see what we can't see, tell us where to direct the ceremony's power." He handed me the obsidian knife. "And if seeing doesn't work, if the first hunger can't be pushed back with ritual alone, use this. It was made to harm things that shouldn't exist. It won't destroy the first hunger, but it might hurt it enough to drive it back down." The knife was heavier than it looked, cold despite the warmth of the room. When I wrapped my fingers around the handle, I felt something pulse through it, a connection to something ancient, something that had been used against darkness before and remembered the taste of it. "When do we leave?" I asked. "Now. We have until midnight. That's when the barriers are weakest, when the ceremony will have the most power. But it's also when the first hunger will be closest to the surface." Chief Running Horse began gathering the ceremonial items. "We'll drive as far as we can, then hike in. Samuel will lead us to the exact spot where the barrier is thinnest. Then we begin." We drove in 2 vehicles, following the fire road toward Dead Horse Creek as the sun sank toward the western mountains. The sky turned orange, then red, then purple, the colors of fire and blood spreading across the horizon like a warning. By the time we reached the trailhead, full darkness had fallen, and the stars were emerging one by one. Cold, distant lights in an infinite black void. Daniel Reeves's vehicle was still there, abandoned. We didn't stop to investigate. The hike in was the longest 2 miles of my life. I led the way, holding my grandfather's stone in one hand and a flashlight in the other, watching the ghost landscape overlay reality with every step. The beneath dwellers were gone, fled to the deepest parts of their territory as far from Dead Horse Creek as they could get. But I could see their trails, their paths, the places where they'd passed through the boundary between worlds. And I could see something else, growing brighter and more terrible as we approached our destination. A light beneath the ground, pulsing, breathing, alive. "We're close," I said. "Maybe another 1/4 mile." "I can feel it," Mary said. Her voice was tight, controlled, like pressure in my chest, like something pushing against me from the inside. That's its presence, its consciousness, bleeding through the barrier. Chief Running Horse's voice was steady, but I could see sweat on his forehead despite the cold night air. "Keep moving, stay focused. Don't let it into your mind." We reached the spot just before midnight. It was a small clearing beside the creek, unremarkable except for a flat stone in the center. A stone that wasn't natural, that had been placed there deliberately by hands that had been dust for centuries. The ceremonial stone. The anchor point for the ritual that had put the first hunger to sleep almost 200 years ago. Through my grandfather's stone, the clearing looked very different. The ghost landscape was thick here, almost solid. The barrier between worlds was stretched thin, transparent, and through it I could see down into the depths beneath Yellowstone, down through layers of rock and magma and something else, something that wasn't matter as I understood it. And at the bottom, so far down that distance lost all meaning, I could see it. The first hunger. It was too big to comprehend, too vast to process. My mind kept trying to find comparisons. A mountain, an ocean, a continent. But nothing worked. It wasn't a thing so much as a presence, a consciousness so ancient, and so alien that simply perceiving it felt like dying and being reborn. It was waking up. I could see it stirring, uncoiling, rising through the depths toward the surface, toward us, toward the thin barrier that was all that separated our world from its hunger. Samuel, Chief Running Horse's voice snapped me back to reality. What do you see? It's coming, rising toward us. I struggled to keep my voice steady. We don't have much time. They arranged themselves in a circle around the ceremonial stone, the four of us at the cardinal points. Chief Running Horse placed the sacred objects on the stone, the drum, the sage, the sweetgrass. He began to chant in the old language. Words I didn't fully understand but felt in my bones, in my blood, in the parts of me that remembered what it meant to be Crow, even when my conscious mind had forgotten. Mary and Frank joined the chant, their voices blending with the chief's, creating harmonies that seemed to resonate with something beyond human hearing. I didn't know the words, but I added my voice anyway, letting the sounds flow through me, feeling them connect with the stone in my hand, with the knife at my belt, with the presence of the first hunger rising from below. The ground began to shake. Small tremors at first, barely noticeable, then stronger, harder, the kind of shaking that knocked you off your feet if you weren't braced for it. The trees around the clearing swayed and groaned. The water in the creek began to churn, flowing backward against the current. And the voice came again. Mine. It was louder this time, closer. I could feel it pressing against my thoughts, trying to push its way into my consciousness. The word wasn't just sound. It was meaning, pure and undiluted. Possession, ownership, an absolute claim on everything above and below. Keep chanting, Chief Running Horse shouted over the noise. Don't stop. Don't let it break your concentration. I held up my grandfather's stone, looking into the ghost landscape, watching the first hunger rise. It was closer now, so close I could make out details. Not physical details. It didn't have a physical form in any meaningful sense, but details of consciousness, of will, of hunger, and I understood something. The first hunger wasn't evil. It wasn't malevolent. It was simply old. So old that concepts like good and evil had no meaning to it. It had existed since before life began on Earth, and it would exist long after life ended. It was hungry not because it was cruel, but because hunger was its nature, its essence, the only thing it knew, but that didn't make it any less dangerous. I need to talk to it, I said. What? Chief Running Horse broke from his chant. Samuel, I need to talk to it. Make contact. It's not going to respond to the ceremony. It's too awake, too aware. But maybe it'll respond to a voice, to something that can offer it what it wants. What does it want? I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. I stepped into the center of the circle, onto the ceremonial stone, holding my grandfather's stone in one hand and the obsidian knife in the other. I closed my eyes and opened my mind, letting down the barriers I'd built, allowing the first hunger's presence to flood into my consciousness. It was like drowning in an ocean of alien thought, like being consumed by a fire that burned without heat. I felt myself fragmenting, dissolving, becoming less and less myself with every passing second. But I also felt understanding. The first hunger was lonely. In all its countless ages of existence, it had never encountered anything like itself. It had consumed countless forms of life, species that had risen and fallen before humans existed, civilizations that had flourished and died in the depths, but none of them had been able to perceive it, to acknowledge it, to communicate. It was hungry, yes, but more than food, it hungered for connection, for recognition, for something, anything, that could see it as more than an abstract force, more than a mindless appetite. I thought about my grandfather, about the love he'd had for the land, for his people, for me, about how he'd spent his entire life preserving knowledge that most people had forgotten, maintaining connections that most people had abandoned, about how he'd left me the stone, knowing somehow that this moment would come, and I understood what I needed to offer. Not sacrifice, not appeasement, a relationship. "I see you," I said, speaking aloud and in my mind simultaneously. "I know you're there. I know you're ancient and vast and beyond my comprehension. But I see you." Silence. The shaking stopped. The first hunger's attention focused on me like the weight of 1,000 suns. "I see you too, little flame. You've been alone for so long, longer than life has existed on the surface, longer than the mountains have stood. That's why you're rising, isn't it? That's why you're trying to reach us. You want to be seen, to be known, to be something more than hunger in the darkness." A pause, then something I hadn't expected. "Yes. I can't give you what you want, not completely. I'm just one person. I'll live maybe another 50 years if I'm lucky, and then I'll be gone. But I can offer you something." I took a deep breath. "Once a year, on the winter solstice, I'll come back to this place. I'll use this stone to reach you, to see you, to acknowledge your existence. And I'll bring you something, a memory, a feeling, a piece of what it means to be alive on the surface. Something to remind you that you're not alone." A long silence. The presence of the first hunger swirled around me, considering. "You would do this. Return to me year after year, knowing what I am." "I would, I will." I thought about the beneath dwellers, fleeing in terror, about Jessica Whitmore and Daniel Reeves and all the others who'd vanished into the mountains. But you have to give something in return. You have to go back to sleep. Stop rising. Let the barriers stay closed. Let the people on the surface live their brief lives in peace. Another pause. The weight of an impossible decision. Then, slowly, I felt the pressure ease. The presence began to recede, sinking back into the depths, withdrawing its consciousness from the edge of reality. "Very well, little flame. I accept your bargain. I will sleep again. But do not forget your promise. If you fail to return, if you break your word, I will wake, and I will not be merciful. I won't forget." The connection broke. The ghost landscape faded, and I was standing on the ceremonial stone in the middle of a clearing, surrounded by 3 stunned tribal police officers, the first light of dawn beginning to break over the eastern mountains. "Samuel," Chief Running Horse's voice was barely a whisper. "What just happened?" "I made a deal," I said, "and I intend to keep it." That was 3 years ago. Every winter solstice since then, I've returned to Dead Horse Creek. I stand on the ceremonial stone. I hold my grandfather's stone, and I reach down into the depths to find the first hunger in its ancient sleep. I share a memory with it. Something warm, something alive, something that carries the feeling of what it means to exist on the surface. My son's first steps. A sunset over the Absaroka Mountains. The taste of my grandmother's fry bread. Small things that mean nothing to an eternal consciousness but everything to me. And the first hunger sleeps on. The beneath dwellers have returned to their territories. The boundaries hold, the disappearances have stopped, at least the ones caused by ancient entities. We still have regular police work to do, crimes to solve, people to protect. Jessica Whitmore was never found. Neither was Daniel Reeves. Their cases remain open, listed as missing persons, filed alongside dozens of others who walked into the Yellowstone backcountry and never came out. I think about them sometimes, wonder if they're still down there somehow, consumed but not destroyed, existing in some form I can't comprehend.